Lonely rancher lived alone for 12 years until an auction mistake gave him a family of 5. Wyoming Territory. Winter of 1887. The wind screamed across the plains like it had something to prove. Under a sky the color of worn tin, Elijah Crow rode into Willow Creek with his coat collar turned up and 12 winters' worth of silence behind his eyes. He was 42, with hands made of weather and eyes that remembered fire. His ranch sat east of town, hidden among wind-cord cottonwoods, where nothing had grown. Right since the night his barn burned, and took his wife and son with it. He came for a machine, an old grass cutter that once belonged to his father, the kind with iron teeth and wooden wheels. Rusted but familiar. It was auction day at the town square, and the snow-packed street buzzed with movement. Farmers, traders, ranch hands, and a few drunks looking for warmth in a crowd. Elijah stood toward the back, arms folded, his name scrolled in the auction ledger like a whisper. He watched the bidding with the disinterest of someone who needed only one thing and nothing else. But somewhere between the cattle harnesses and the hay barrels, the auctioneer shouted over the wind. Elijah Crow, winning bid on lot 47. Heads turned. Elijah frowned. He hadn't raised a finger. From the side of the square, a horse-drawn cart creaked forward. Inside sat a young woman, maybe 28, brown-skinned and straight-backed despite the cold, holding tightly to 4 children, 2 boys, 2 girls, all between the ages of 5 and 11. The woman's dark eyes scanned the crowd, fierce and full of warning. "We're not property," she shouted. "We're people." The square went still. Murmurs spread like frostbite. A horse trader near the saloon barked a laugh. "Looks like crows buying company for the long nights." A middle-aged woman clutched her shawl tighter. "God bless them poor things." On the courthouse steps, Mayor Harlan narrowed his eyes. He knew Elijah. Knew the rancher kept to himself. Knew this wasn't right. Elijah stepped forward slowly. "What the hell is lot 47? The auctioneer cleared his throat. "Service contract domestic help. 3 months. That's what the papers say." Elijah stared at the woman. She didn't flinch. One of the children, the smallest girl, peeked out from behind her skirts, big brown eyes wide with fear. For a moment, Elijah wasn't in the square. He was back in the barn. Smoke choking the rafters. His boys' cries somewhere he couldn't reach. The ache in his chest bloomed like a second winter. The crowd was watching. He looked at the girl, then at the woman. He could walk away. He didn't. He stepped forward and placed a hand on the woman's shoulder. "You're coming with me." She tensed under his touch, but didn't pull away. He knelt in front of the little girl and handed her a folded handkerchief, faded blue cotton, worn soft. "It's clean. Keep it." The girl clutched it like a treasure. Whispers turned to laughter. The horse trader sneered. "Look at him playing hero." Elijah turned, his jaw set like stone. Laugh all you want. They're under my roof now. He guided the 5 of them to his wagon. The snow crunched beneath their boots. Lena said nothing, but her eyes never left his face. Mayor. Harlan watched them disappear into the whiteness, a suspicion tightening in his chest. The auctioneer folded the ledger, the ink still wet beside Elijah Crow's name. Lot 47 was gone, but trouble, it seemed, had just begun. The trail home was long and biting, with wind that howled through the cottonwoods like wolves mourning something lost. Elijah Crow sat silent at the reins, the wagon creaking beneath the weight of unfamiliar company. Beside him, Lena held Lily close under her shawl. Sam, Clara, and Ben huddled in the back. Too cold to speak, too scared to ask where they were going. They crossed the dry creek bed by dusk, the outline of Elijah's ranch rising through the frost and ghost-thin snow. What had once been a proud homestead now slumped like a wounded beast. The barn still stood, but part of its roof caved in. The house, patched with mismatched wood and soot, darkened windows, looked more memory than home. Elijah helped them down one by one, wordless. Lena's eyes swept across the land, noticing the scorched beams, the charred fence posts, the blackened stump near the barn that still smelled faintly of smoke even after 12 winters. Inside the house was sparse. A stove, a table, a bed in one corner. Firewood stacked, like discipline, not comfort. No lace, no curtains, just necessity. Lena unpacked flour and beans from her bag and moved instinctively toward the stove. Elijah didn't stop her. He sat on the porch steps, cleaning a bridle with slow, methodical strokes. His eyes drifted toward the barn, then away. While supper cooked, the children wandered quietly. Clara pocketed a biscuit from the stove, slipping it under her coat when she thought no one looked. Ben refused to come inside until Lena coaxed him. Sam explored the perimeter silently, eyes sharp as a coyote's. In the corner of the living space, Lena found a broken picture frame tucked behind an empty crate. It held the scorched photograph of a woman and a boy, both smiling. The boy's hair curled like lilies. The woman's face had Elijah's eyes. Lena replaced it carefully, but her guard tightened. When night fell, Elijah lit a single lantern. The fire in the stove warmed the room, but not the space between them. Lena laid blankets near the hearth. The children curled up, exhausted. Clara slept with one hand on the stolon. Biscuit. Outside, the wind shifted. Elijah stood suddenly, crossing to the door. He opened it just enough to hear a distant snort. Hoof beats, then nothing. He closed it again. Wild horse? Lena asked quietly. He shook his head. Not wild. He stayed up late, sitting by the window, sharpening his old knife. The kind used once for hunting or defense. In the hours before dawn, he walked quietly to the small cot where Lily slept. She shivered under a thin blanket, cheeks pink with cold. From a chest near his bed, Elijah pulled out a faded child's shirt, soft flannel, patched at the elbows. He laid it gently across her body. He'd want you warm, he whispered. Lena stirred, watching him from the shadows. She said nothing, but her eyes lingered longer than before. Morning came gray and cold. Elijah made coffee strong enough to melt a nail. Lena handed out breakfast in silence. Afterward, as Elijah cleared the table, something caught his eye. A small piece of bread, perfectly square, sat alone on the wooden surface. Not eaten, not forgotten. He looked at Clara. She looked away, her little hands gripping the hem of her coat. It wasn't an accident. It was an offering. A quiet apology from a girl who stole because hunger taught her not to trust. Elijah didn't speak. He just sat down, bread in hand, and stared at the window where snow kissed the sill. Later that morning, he brought the children outside. This here's a fence post, he said, handing Sam a hammer. It holds the land in place. To Ben, he gave a water bucket. To Clara, a loaf of dough and space beside the stove. To Lily, a brush for the old mule. He did not smile, but something inside him, something buried with a boy 12 years ago, stirred. They were not his blood, but they were breathing. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The snow melted slowly, revealing patches of dry earth, like old scars resurfacing after winter's silence. Life at the ranch settled into rhythm, though no one called it peace yet. Each day began before light. Elijah chopped wood. Lena stoked the stove, and the children, still weary, learned the steps of survival, one quiet task at a time. Sam preferred silence and shadows, often watching from the fence line. Clara moved like a cat, quick hands and quicker glances. Ben flinched every time Elijah came near, though Elijah never raised a voice or a hand. Lily sang soft, bright tunes in Spanish and broken English. Little notes floating over the prairie winds like they had somewhere better to be. One evening, while the wind pushed at the shutters, and the fire hissed low, Lena sat beside Elijah. After the children had fallen asleep, she held a tin cup of tea, her eyes distant. I was engaged once, she said. To a Union soldier. He died at Gettysburg. I waited years before someone told me. Elijah said nothing. I found those children in an abandoned work camp near the border, she continued. No names, no families, just scars. I could not walk away. Elijah looked at her for a long time, then nodded once. Not approval, not pity, just understanding. He took the children out riding 2 days later, one by one. The Wyoming wind bit through coats and skin alike, but the horses needed movement, and so did the souls in that house. Sam rode steady and still like he was born on a saddle. Clara shrieked when the horse trotted, then laughed louder. Ben clung to the reins so tight. His knuckles turned white, but Elijah never let go of the lead rope. And Lily. She stood on the saddle while the horse walked, arms out like wings. That night, wolves howled near the ridge. Elijah stood guard with his rifle. Lena stood beside him with a kitchen knife. They always come this close, she asked. Only when they smell change. The next afternoon, an old rider came up the hill. Jake? Elijah muttered, lowering his saw. Jake dismounted slowly, his mustache white with age and weather. He looked past Elijah at the children chopping carrots by the porch. You've got yourself a crowd, Jake said. Elijah didn't answer. Jake looked at Lena, then back at Elijah. Folks in town are saying things that you took in someone else's mess. A Mexican widow and some strays. Elijah's jaw tensed. They've got names. You just never asked. Jake grunted. You always were stubborn. Just don't bring trouble to your doorstep. When Jake rode off, Lena didn't speak. But Elijah saw the way she folded her hands tighter, like waiting for blame. He didn't give it. Later that night, while sharpening fence stakes with Sam, Elijah handed him a small, worn pocket knife. You don't need words to make something strong, he said. Sam took it carefully, eyes wide. The jagged scar on his neck barely visible under his scarf. Then for the first time, he smiled, just a flicker, but it stayed. That evening, Elijah returned from the barn to find something taped to his door. A piece of paper, rough edges, crayons. It showed a man with dark hair and a gray coat standing next to a crooked barn. Around him, 5 smaller figures, one holding a brush, one holding a loaf, one with a stick, one laughing, and one silent. Above it, in shaky handwriting, our house. Elijah stared at it for a long while. He didn't take it down. Inside, Sam sat beside the fire, carving a piece of wood with the pocket knife. Clara offered him half her biscuit. Ben leaned against Lena's side, not flinching. Lily hummed the same tune as always. And Elijah, man of few words, fewer hopes, and more regrets than he'd ever admit, stood at the threshold of something he didn't know how to name. But maybe, just maybe, this time he would stay. Spring crept in quietly that year. The snow thinned, revealing patches of wild grass, brittle and gray. The barn no longer smoked in Elijah's memory. Now it stood rebuilt, if not yet complete. The children tended goats. Lena baked cornbread. Life in its fragile form was taking root again until the day the mayor came. Mayor Harlan arrived on horseback, flanked by 2 deputies with polished boots and dustless coats. His presence, like a storm, pulled the wind. Still, Elijah stepped off the porch before they could dismount. You rebuilding an orphanage, Crow? Harlan asked, eyes scanning the porch where Lily peeked around the doorframe. Rebuilding my land, Elijah said flatly. Harlan smirked. Town says you're housing unregistered dependents. No papers, no rights to stay. They're not livestock, Elijah replied. Law don't care if they're pigs or angels. No. Papers is no papers. Lena stepped out beside Elijah, shoulders squared. If we leave, will you leave him be? Elijah's jaw clenched. No one's leaving. Harlan dismounted, pulling a scroll from his satchel. You've got 30 days before this land, if it harbors fugitives, can be reclaimed by the territory. He handed the notice to Elijah. Then, with a smug nod, mounted again. Maybe you're too Soft to bury your ghosts, crow. Just remember, Voss doesn't forget what he pays for. That name chilled the air more than the wind. That night, as the house slept, Elijah walked the perimeter with his rifle. The stars were sharp and cold. The wind had turned strange, quieter, like it listened. From the barn's shadow, something moved. He turned sharply. Who's there? A shape emerged. Tall, lean, reeking of sweat and tobacco. It was Voss. His hat sat low over his eyes, one hand resting on the hilt of a knife. I came for what's mine, Voss said, voice smooth as oil. You bought a lie, Crow. That woman and those kids belong to me. Elijah raised the rifle. Step 1 foot close, sir. You think the law will shield you? Voss laughed. This land is lonely. Accidents happen from the porch. Lena's voice cut through the dark. Then maybe you should be the one to fall first. Boss turned. She stood holding a lantern, its light casting her shadow like a giant. In her other hand, she gripped a pot of boiling water from the stove. She took my blade. Voss growled, realizing too late the glint of his own knife in her belt. Walk away, she said steady. Or this water finds your face. There was a pause. Voss stepped forward anyway. Elijah fired a warning shot inches from his boot. Voss flinched. You got guts. Fine, but guts don't stop bullets. Then, as he lunged, Lena hurled the boiling water not at him, but at the dirt, blinding him in a cloud of hot steam. Elijah swung the rifle stock hard. Voss stumbled, a gash blooming across his brow. Blood met dust. You'll regret this, Voss hissed. Backing away, eyes wild. You don't get to win. You already lost, Lena said. Eyes blazing. We're not yours. We never were. We vanished into the trees. Elijah stood breathless, the barrel of his rifle trembling slightly. Lena stepped to his side, placing the knife in his hand. Next time, she said, you'll let me have first swing. He looked at her, eyes full of gratitude, full of awe. Later that night, in silence, Elijah retrieved a tin box. Buried beneath the crescent moonstone on Cherokee ground. Inside was the original deed signed before state lines had meaning, when the land answered only to honor. 3 days later, in a courtroom lit by morning sun, Elijah laid down the deed. If the law can't make room for what's right, he told the judge, it's no law at all. And this time, Lena stood behind him, not as someone who needed protection, but as someone who had already proven she could fight to protect him. 3 days later, Elijah stood in the courthouse, hat in hand, the old Cherokee deed resting on the clerk's desk like a quiet weapon. The judge, a stern man with weary eyes, examined the yellowed paper, tracing the federal stamp and ancestral signature. This land's protected, the judge said, voice low. Pre-territorial rights cannot be reclaimed without a full hearing. Elijah nodded. And my family stays. All of them. Voss burst into the chamber moments later, bandaged and fuming. You think an old paper changes anything? But behind him, two marshals stepped in. One, carrying a warrant for trafficking minors under false contracts, the lead marshal said, and assault. Voss lunged. The marshals didn't flinch. Steel met wrist. He hit the floor in chains. Outside, Lena stood with the children. When Elijah stepped out, she met him with tired eyes and a question unspoken. He nodded once. It's done. In that moment, beneath the Wyoming sun, justice felt like breath. After drowning, not loud, not grand, but deeply earned. Weeks passed after the courthouse ruling, but the air around the Crow Ranch remained thick with tension, as if justice had only borrowed time. Summer tiptoed in slow then fast, heating the soil, drying the streams, and bringing with it a silence too still to trust. Then one morning, Elijah stepped outside and looked up. The first signs came with the color of the sky. Yellow, gray, and angry, like the land itself was bracing to breathe dust. Elijah knew what was coming. He had lived through 2 sandstorms in his lifetime. The third would not show mercy. Just because he had something to lose now. He moved fast, pulled the animals into the lower barn, shuttered the house windows, double-checked every latch and rope. Lena gathered the children, shoving blankets beneath the door cracks, boiling water in case someone choked on dust. The wind rose like a freight train, and the prairie disappeared in a blur of grit and thunder. Then came the roar. It slammed the ranch like a fist. Boards creaked, nails screamed, the air outside turned to stone and sand, and somewhere in the chaos, the cattle broke loose. Elijah ran before anyone could stop him. He vanished into the storm with a rope, a lantern, and the curse of a man who knew loss too well to let it happen again. It took 40 minutes before he came back. He stumbled through the front door, bloody at the temple. Shirt ripped across the back, the lantern was gone. The rope burned his hands raw, but all 3 cattle were tied to the post outside. Lena caught him as he fell to his knees. They moved him to the bed. The children huddled at the far end of the room, eyes wide and quiet. Lena cleaned his wounds with boiled water, then covered him in every blanket they had. The wind still screamed, but inside she began to hum. It was a song from Chihuahua. Soft, circular, full of soil and memory. The lullaby her grandmother used to sing during storms when tin roofs shook and fear tried to crawl under your skin. Elijah didn't speak, but his breathing calmed. At the far end of the barn, the children went to work. Under Lena's direction, they mixed clay and water in an old trough. Clara and Sam carried buckets. Lily held the nails, and Ben, the boy who had never touched Elijah, without flinching, pressed mud against the barn wall with small, determined hands. By midnight, the wind began to fade. Morning broke through cracks in the shutters, pale and thin. Lena was still beside the bed, half asleep, her fingers wrapped around Elijah's. He opened his eyes slowly, saw her face. The children, the faint scent of lime and smoke. For a second, he forgot the pain. "I made something for you," he said hoarsely. She blinked. "What?" He reached beneath the pillow. In his callous palm was a small coin, worn smooth, the kind you kept because it had been someone else's first. "It was my boy's." His first tooth came loose. He put it under his bed. Never cared for fairy tales, but he believed in trade. Lena held the coin delicately. "He'd want you to have this," Elijah whispered. She did not speak, just closed her hand around it and held it to her chest. It weighed less than anything she'd carried, but felt heavier than hope. The next morning, the ranch smelled like mud and firewood. Clara passed out bread. Sam helped stack buckets. Ben leaned against the doorframe like he belonged there. Lily, her cheeks smudged with dust, climbed onto the bed and looked Elijah square in the eyes. "Pa," she said. The word hung in the air. Elijah's mouth parted, stunned. No one laughed. No one corrected her. And then, for the first time in 12 years, he smiled. It was crooked, small, almost shy, but it was real. A man carved in grief, now learning how to bend towards something soft. Lena, watching from the corner, wiped her eyes without turning away. Outside, the ranch stood still. Inside, something finally moved. The calm after the storm never felt peaceful, just hollow. For days, Lena moved like a ghost through the house. Her steps careful, her smiles practiced. She cooked, cleaned, mended shirts, kissed foreheads, but her eyes kept drifting east toward the line of hills that vanished into New Mexico. Then one morning, Elijah woke to silence. No fire in the stove. No sound of Lena humming. The children still slept. On the kitchen table, folded neatly, was a piece of paper. He opened it with fingers that already trembled. "Elijah, you gave us safety. You gave me more than any man ever did with just your silence and your steadiness. But the world does not forget people like me, and it will not forgive you for keeping us. I'd rather be gone than ruin you. Take care of them. They are more than I ever deserved. Thank you for letting me pretend just for a while that I belonged." Lena next to it sat Sam's drawing. A crude map marked with a star near an old river crossing, the route traced in pencil toward the border. Elijah didn't think. He just grabbed his coat, wincing from the bruises still healing on his side, and saddled his horse. The prairie was dry again, dust lifting with every hoofbeat. He rode hard, faster than he should, heart racing like it had not in years. At the edge of the ridge, where winds snapped through the gulch, he saw her walking alone. One bag slung over her shoulder, head down, shoulders tight like she was bracing for another goodbye. He dismounted roughly, the horse crying out behind him. "Lena," she turned, her face was already wet with tears. "You're bleeding," she said, running toward him. "You're leaving," he answered. She looked away. I thought if I just disappeared, it would be easier. 4. Who? For everyone. Elijah stepped closer. Slow. He pulled something from his coat pocket. A silver ring dulled by time. The band was worn, the stone long gone. This was hers, he said. My wife. I buried the match with our son. But this. He held it out, resting it in her palm. She'd want you to stay. Lena stared at it, fingers closing around the metal like it could stop her heart from breaking. Then she dropped her bag and stepped forward, arms wrapping around Elijah's middle, face pressed to his chest. He didn't flinch. He held her like he was afraid she'd vanish again. I'm not your wife, she whispered. No, he said, voice low. But you're the reason I still know how to breathe. When they returned, the children met them at the gate. Clara ran and buried her face in Lena's skirt. Ben held on to her sleeve. Sam gave Elijah a look, not one of questions, but quiet understanding. Inside the house, Elijah sat at the table. He unfolded the letter. Again. His voice shook only once, he said. I'd rather be gone than ruin you. He looked at the children, then Lena. Yo, why I'm alive. Outside the prairie. Wind stirred dust into little spirals. But inside that old mended house, the air was still and full of something steady. 1 year passed. The prairie had changed its colors again, dry wheat to green, green to gold. The wind still roamed freely, but it sang less sharply through the rebuilt beams of the Crow Ranch. The barn stood straight with new nails and old stories. The porch had a fresh coat of paint, and on the front gate, carved deep into solid cedar, were the words, Croy Ranch, 7 hearts under one roof. The town of Willow Creek had stopped whispering, not because it had run out of things to say, but because time and kindness had worn down their suspicion. Elijah filed the adoption papers himself. It took 3 trips to the Capitol and 1 heated argument with a judge, but in the end Sam, Clara, Ben, and Lily became Crows. In name, though they had already been so in heart. Lena remained Lena Ruiz. She refused the title of wife, not because she did not love Elijah, but because some part of her still feared chains. Even if they were made of gold, she chose her name for the children, for herself, and for the past. She refused to forget. Still, she stood beside Elijah when they took their first family photograph. The town photographer arranged them in front of the barn, the sun behind the windmill, casting long shadows. Sam stood tall beside Elijah, his hand resting on a carved walking stick. Clara leaned against Lena's arm, her hair braided with red thread. Ben held Lily's hand, and Lily grinned with both front teeth missing. Behind them stood the white mare, still as a statue. Elijah didn't smile, not with his mouth, but his hand brushed Lena's as the shutter clicked. Their fingers touched, quiet, unspoken. And in that silence, a word was said. Later that day, Elijah handed Lena a small box. Inside lay a thin leather necklace, worn soft by time. Hanging from it was a charm-shaped Like a horse's head, carved from river stone. I had it made, he said. She's fast, stubborn, and never lets go of her young. Lena touched the charm. Like me? He nodded. You're home now. She said nothing. Just clasped the necklace around her neck and pulled him close, not into a kiss, but a quiet lean. Like two old trees growing beside each other, shaped by the same wind. That evening, Clara walked into town alone. She carried a basket of bread wrapped in clean linen. The same hands that once stole out of hunger, now offered out of memory. She found the alley behind the tourist shop where 3 barefoot children sat waiting. This is for you, Clara said, voice steady. No need to earn it. The children stared, then took the bread. The tour's wife saw it from the window. She told her sister, who told the pastor's wife, who told the mayor's daughter. By sundown, people were no longer whispering. They were remembering. That night, Elijah sat on the porch, boots off, pipe unlit. He watched Clara return, empty basket in hand, a new sense of calm in her steps. She did good, Lena said, stepping beside him. They all have, Elijah replied. He looked at the ranch, at the crooked windmill, the chickens dusting in the yard, the sound of Sam's wood carving against the fence post. I used to think the fire took everything, he said. Lena looked out at the dusk. It made space. He turned to her. For what? She leaned her head on his shoulder. For this. And in that simple moment, without ceremony or song, without rings or speeches, their story deepened into something even the prairie wind would carry. 5 years later, the Crow Ranch no longer stood as a lone figure on the prairie. It had become a symbol. The windmill still spun slowly under the Wyoming sky, but now it turned alongside rows of harvest-ready wheat and grazing cattle. Children's laughter echoed across the pastures. Chickens scattered beneath the porch where Lena strung fresh herbs and Elijah sanded the handle of a new branding iron carved with a horse and a heart. At summer, Willow Creek hosted its first orphan benefit fair, organized by Elijah and Lena themselves. Booths lined the field behind the church. Quilts waved from clotheslines. Kids bobbed for apples, while fiddles played in the distance. The townsfolk mingled with Cherokee neighbors, sharing bread, beadwork, and stories that once might have been spoken in hushed tones. At the center stage, a boy stepped forward. Sam Crow, now 16, stood with shoulders broad and eyes steady. His hair was longer now, tied back in a soft knot like Elijah's once was. He held no paper, but his voice was clear. When I was a child, he said, I didn't speak, not because I couldn't, but because I believed no one would listen. A murmur passed through the crowd. My mother, Sam continued, glancing toward Lena, saved us when the world threw us away. She carried us through dust and hunger, not with promises, but with her arms. He turned to Elijah, who stood quietly near the shade of a sycamore. And my father, he grew love from ash, where fire once took. His family, he made space for a new one. We are not blood, but we are bound. The crowd was silent. A woman dabbed her eyes. The mayor lowered his hat. A Cherokee elder placed a hand over his heart. Sam stepped down without flourish. He simply walked into the crowd where Clara hugged him tight and Ben thumped his back proudly. Later that evening, as stars pierced through the summer haze, Elijah and Lena stood in front of the old barn. In their hands, a plank of charred wood salvaged from the original structure burned 12 years ago. They knelt together. Elijah held the carving chisel steady, Lena guiding his hand into the blackened oak they etched. Where fire took, love returned. Behind them, the children placed lanterns along the path to the pasture. Light spilled across the fields in soft golden pools. A small ceremony followed. Half Cherokee, half Old Mexican blessing. No clergy, no judge, just neighbors, friends, and those who had once looked on in doubt, now gathered in quiet celebration. Silent, a totem pole stood at the heart of the field, raised by Cherokee craftsmen and painted by Lena's brush. On it were symbols, a maple leaf for memory, a horse for freedom, a heart nested in flame. Under the rising moon, the Crow family gathered around it. Elijah rested a hand on Sam's shoulder. Clara placed her ribbon in Lena's hair. Ben whispered a joke that made Lily giggle loud enough for the prairie to hear. Then, one by one, people began to clap. Not loudly, not the kind of applause you give for a performance, but slow, reverent, like saying thank you for something sacred. They clapped for the man who survived silence, for the woman who protected the voiceless, for the children who found their names in a place once lost to dust. They clapped because somewhere along the forgotten edges of the American West, something rare had grown, something stronger than fences or fires or law. The family, and in the wind, as the moon crested high, it was said the land whispered back. And so on a forgotten patch of prairie, where wind once carried only sorrow, a new kind of legend was born. Not of gunfights or gold, but of healing, belonging, and the quiet courage to start again. Elijah Crow didn't set out to build a family. He just refused to walk away. And in doing so, he found something stronger than blood. Love forged from ash. And a home built not with walls, but with hearts. If this story touched you, made you feel a little warmer, a little braver, or just reminded you that even the loneliest soul can find light again, then don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Love Stories. Here we honor the forgotten. We tell the tales buried beneath dust and silence. And we believe, just like Elijah and Lena, that the truest stories ride on the wind. Hit that bell, like, comment, and share this with someone who still believes in second chances. We'll see you on the next ride. Until then, stay wild, stay true, and never stop believing in love on the frontier.